Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Humans Season 3. So in this video, I will review Season 3 of Humans as a whole, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Humans up to the end of Season 3. If you haven't seen all of Season 3, you will not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things will be spoiled for you. So this year we got another season of Humans. Unfortunately, I was not unable to cover it weekly like I did with Season 2 because I was too busy with too many other things like The Expanse. It was a shame that it came out the same time as The Expanse because I would have liked to review it otherwise. But anyway, Humans has always been one of my favorite shows. I really enjoy it. I think it's really a sort of realistic look at what life, modern day society would be like if synthetic life or robots or androids, or however you want to call them, were commonplace. And Season 3 has put a really interesting spin on it because Season 2 ended with a cliffhanger, and I was saying, some people saying, oh, maybe the show won't end here, but I'm glad it didn't. I was thinking that I really wanted to see what happened next because it sets up a whole new dynamic where since everywhere start to become conscience, they start to become sentient. And so this season starts in a very interesting place where there's like this whole backstory that happened in between Season 2 and 3, and I think it really enriches the world where Season 3 is all about all the sense became conscious, but then they rolled out a new model of sense that instead of having green eyes, to have red eyes. So they even signify the difference between the two types of sense. The green eyes, they think, are the weird ones, and the red eyes are the ones that are more like the sense used to be. They're just typical automatons that do what they're told. And this brings up a really fascinating dynamic and like aspects of the season I thought worked really well, and it's much more fresh, it's much more innovative than the previous seasons have been. However, that being said, I don't think they do the best with this premise. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I was very unhappy in the direction that they went. So for me, I would say, and I take this with a grain of salt, but I would say for me that Season 3 is probably my least favorite season of Humans so far. But I want to be very clear about this. I'm not saying it's like way worse than the other seasons. They're all on par, in fact. In fact, Season 1 and Season 3 are kind of very close. So it's just by a hair. Just by a hair, I think I like Season 1 slightly better than Season 3. And Season 2, of course, is my favorite season of Humans. Still is. And the reason why I say that is because Season 3 it's the first season of the show that I think is very unbalanced. And it's very inconsistent. And that was one of my favorite things about Season 1. Particularly was its consistency. That I always described it as it was the best paced season of any show I've ever seen. It was never too slow, never too fast, always going at the right pace, always keeping you interesting. It wasn't like blow you away, but it was constantly at this good level, whereas Season 3 is kind of the opposite of that. Season 3, it's more like some of these other shows where it gets really, really good, so much better than Season 1 ever was, but then it gets really, really bad, much worse than Season 1 ever was. So it's like inconsistent in its quality and its tones, if you know what I'm saying. Like some of the storylines this year I thought were really boring. Other storylines I thought were amazing. And then there's some plot twists that I really did not like, and other plot twists I really did like. So it was, and this wasn't the case with Season 2 at all either. So it was definitely the most sort of inconsistent, if you know what I'm saying, season of the show so far. So now let's get into some of the details of the season. First, the strong points of this year I think is Mia and Laura's story. Although I will say Mia's story did get a bit boring at times, but nothing too bad, because it was about her sort of trying to prove to the world that since are friends and they can live in harmony, and the way she did it was through example, through trying to just live amongst humans and be kind. She was met with a lot of strife. Now, this season is really different than the previous seasons, and again, like whenever I watched this season, I was like, wow, this has the potential to be the best season ever, and I'm probably maybe a bit disappointed that it wasn't, because it is a really fresh and interesting dynamic where you have it's almost like there are a group of peoples, a subgenre of people, and of course is a huge analogy for racism or refugees or other, races trying to integrate into a nation or a society where they're the minority and where they're feared and sanctioned, and there's a lot of hate groups in response to them. And I thought all that was done really well, and that was really fascinating to me. This is something I don't think any show has really covered, at least not in the same way. I mean, I like to compare Humans to Westworld, but I think, and I'm not going to say one's better than the other, they're very different. But Westworld, it's good for what it is, but what it is something totally different, as it focuses more on like a violent revolution, and the corporations and the humans are very contemptible to the androids, and they fight back. Whereas with humans, they're not as contemptible to the androids. They treat them well, and in general, the androids aren't being as violent in return. But it has the dynamic sort of factions where you do have some of the Sens who want to be more violent and some who want to be more peaceful. And I love that. It is done so well. And I also have to give a quick shout out to the opening intro, which is still one of my favorite intros of any show. I think I might even put this above Game of Thrones, particularly the theme music, which I love. It always, in the way it just ramps up and goes, gets right into it, I always watch it on repeat. I love this intro. And the intro this season, it's the same music, but they have different visuals with the hate groups and people beating up Sens, and it gets you into the sort of mindset of the dynamic that they have for season 3. So absolutely, positively love that. Well, anyway, getting back to Mia, the stuff with her meeting her old boyfriend or whatever from season 2 that betrayed her. I mean, that seemed kind of let's do a shout out to season 2. I mean, I didn't hate it, but I didn't think it was great. I did really enjoy, though, when she met another old lady who lived down the house, and she happened to have another conscious Sen with her, but that he was in hiding because of the hate, and that he looked up to and was inspired by me. And plus, I like the fact throughout the season you had, maybe they didn't focus on this as much as I would have cared for, but they had a lot of human rights groups who supported the Sens and supported Sens' rights and supported their consciousness, while you also had the hate groups. And this is still a very realistic show that reflects what society is like, because you have the different political groups and political spans. You'd have, people, some groups who would stick out for certain, people who are discriminated against, who would stick up for them and demand their rights, while you have other groups that would discriminate against them and be more hate groups. And so we have that same dynamic here with humans, and I love that. I love the complexity. I love the realism to it. Now, Laura, as I mentioned, I liked her this season as well, because she is very interesting, and to see her character journey, because in season 1 she didn't even like Sens, she didn't want one, and where she sort of flipped, where she became more the protector of the Sens, and was sticking a spokesperson for their rights, and how she joined the sort of council that was making all these decisions. And basically they let her join as a mouthpiece, or just as a token sign, oh yeah, we're considering all sides, when really they weren't. But then she did have an ally who was saying, no, you can push them in the right direction. And you can see from time to time her doing that, which I really enjoyed. That being said, her relationship with that other guy who was also a member of the board, again, I didn't hate it. It was fine, but it wasn't particularly that interesting to me. And then there's also the thing with the red eyes, which I did like the different dynamics between them, especially seeing like the younger girl at school, and they're sort of teaching her, oh, red eyes are good, green eyes are bad, and that simplicity. And it's funny that she was like smarter than their teachers, like actually green eyes aren't all that bad, and it's interesting that at the moment, society is very much against the green eyes, and of course there was that tragic event where they all became conscious, which we saw at the end of season 2. Apparently that resulted in thousands of deaths, so it's looked at as like a traumatic event. I think they even say it by the day. And that was really, again, it's very dynamic. It makes it not as simple, but still people like Laura and Maddie, and they all like recognize that the green eyes are sentient and conscious, where society at large doesn't seem willing to let them do that. And then you also had Joe. He had a very interesting character arc as well, because he was the one who was all for the Sins at the start of season 1, but now he's like totally against them. You see, he lives in a town that is outlawed them or sort of banned them, where it's just humans, no sense. And it's interesting when Karen goes there to hide with her new son Sam and pretend to be humans, and she thought it would be the perfect place to hide because no one would be looking for them there. But as we see with what happens to her, it's probably not a good idea because by going there, it's a place where if she's caught out, the consequences will be really dire, because they're not supposed to be sins there. So the people there obviously don't think too kindly of sins. Joe being an exception, he doesn't really mind them, while other people there are very prejudiced against them. And of course, as soon as she's found out, she dies. And I did love that her storyline with Sam, and how they sort of preambled this, where she tried, where Sam was put in danger with the car, and her program shut down because she was programmed not to directly put herself in danger, but she does end up kind of doing that. You think that she kind of skirts the program, because she didn't necessarily like throw herself in front of a car or anything like that, but she did do something that she knew would put her in danger in order to save her son, and that she was able to overcome that programming. That whole moment of her death, that was very touching, and the consequences of Joe, it bonded him to Sam more, and how he went on to sort of raise him. That was all great stuff. That was some of the highlights of the season, which I absolutely, positively loved. So, what did I not like? Well, let me get into the whole thing with Max and his whole group of Sins. Now, to be clear, I didn't hate that storyline. I liked it. I actually thought it was interesting. There's a lot of aspects to it that I did like, but there were a lot of aspects to it I did not like. Namely, like the characters like Angus and Antal, who, especially Angus, who I thought was very cliche. She was a very stereotypical. I know it would make sense that they would have some sense in this group that wouldn't necessarily agree, that would be like, these humans keep treating us like shit, they want to kill us, we need to fight back. That makes sense. But her whole character and the way she went about it seemed like this is where I think it was sort of a down point of the show, because they're just retreading what they've already done. She sounds a lot like previous characters they had. She sounds a lot like Hester from season 2, although maybe she's not as violent as Hester, but although she does end up suiciding, blowing herself up in a suicide bomb. So yeah, I guess she is as violent as Hester, but in a different way. But still, she came off as way too similar, and just the whole cliche about, I did like how they explored her background a bit, where they see how she was treated when she became conscious, and her, owner locked her in a box because he couldn't deal with the fact that she had become conscious. That did give her a nice texture to her character, but still overall, I still think what they did with her character was, and how she kept fighting against Max. It was obvious that she was gonna, but they were gonna butt heads. So I ultimately didn't care for her character that much. And the thing with Antal, like, it was supposed to be this huge shock because he was Max's right-hand man, and he ended up to be, like, the evil bad... I don't know if you say evil, but he was the main figurehead in charge of the violence sense who were doing the bombs and stuff. It was supposed to be this big twist, which I thought... I didn't care for. Ooh, it was him. I thought that was kind of gimmicky. Didn't really like it that much, and overall, I didn't like when they made his character evil. I mean, it just didn't come off as dynamic. Came off as kind of two-dimensional, which, again, the show has always been known for being... always having really three-dimensional flesh stuff. That was the thing I was praising it for a lot, especially in season 2. How there were no true villains, no true heroes. They were all completely dynamic. But here we get characters like this, which I guess they try to say his perspective, but he just didn't come off as real to me. But the one scene that I really hated, because I was actually loving this season, despite some of the stuff I thought wasn't as good, until we get to the scene, which I don't know if I'd say I had to give up on the show just because of the scene, but it did make me think a hell of a lot lesser of the show. And that's the scene where you get Antal. He breaks into Laura's house and he wants to prove that she's not on their side, even though she purports to be on their side. So he gets a random old guy from the street, and he gets Sam and says, "Which one do you want me to kill?" And she says, "Kill Sam. Don't kill the old guy." And so that proves that she's not their friend. I know that was supposed to be dynamic. It's supposed to show that she has hidden prejudice that she is not afraid to acknowledge. But I didn't buy this scene. The whole scene felt really fake to me. First of all, I know she's scared for her life. She's scared for her family's life. But she's smart enough to know this is a gambit. She's smart enough to know that by saying Sam, all she's doing is playing. I know she's afraid, but I don't care. I still don't buy, because she's a smart character. She's been shown to be a smart character. She knows the deal, and she knows that the Antal that she's playing right into his hands by saying kill Sam. She knows this, so I don't buy it. I think it's total bullshit. And first of all, I don't think that she would say Sam. I know that the whole point is, there's hidden prejudice that you didn't know about. No, I don't buy it. I think that was done for plot purposes. I think the plot, required for Sam to have a falling out with them, so let's come up with this thing. I don't think it goes with her character. I think the way they showed her character, the way she bonded with Mia and the way she bonded with Sam, that she would have chosen a random old guy rather than someone that she knows and cares about, even if it is a synth. So I think that whole scene, I hated it. It seemed like bullshit to me. It was a very low point for the entire show, in my opinion. But as I said, there's a lot of things about the show that I did really enjoy, particularly the ending, getting back to Mia, her death, very powerful. Very powerful. And again, and I like that the show was bold enough to kill off pretty much arguably the main character of the entire show. And showrunners have confirmed that she is dead. So if they're not going to come up with some weird sci-fi way to bring her back to life, she's gone. And I think that was a very bold decision for the show to do. And the way it played out was really interesting. The whole, the whole dilemma towards the end of the season with the bomb and Laura finding out what this secret plan is to destroy all the synths, and actually turning that other guy to her side and going public, even though she knew it would mean she would be arrested. She didn't care. She did it anyway. That's the kind of conviction that her character was shown, and I love that. I thought that played out very well, and seeing Mia's death and how they televised it, and children went to look away, and Laura's like, no, she would want us to look and see, and how she just held out her hand in peace, as she was being very reminiscent of Gandhi and Martin Luther King and other sort of historical, peaceful figures, and that's the type of person that Mia would want to be, and I loved it. I thought it was really powerful. Now, speaking of the ending, let's get into Miska and her journey, which this is another storyline I didn't really care for. I wouldn't say that I hated it, but it was kind of boring. I didn't really care for, because Niska's journey line was kind of interesting, because it started with the bombing, and her girlfriend was almost killed in the bombing, so that motivates her to go off to try to find the perpetrators and kill them. And I love that aspect. It was set up this interesting storyline, but they didn't do anything with it, really. She just found this one guy who set off the particular bomb, and then she killed him with the synth. And then I thought she would, because I was expecting that she would continue the quest to find the group responsible, and we find out that Antal was the one who was ultimately responsible, so I thought she would lead back to him. But instead of going off on this weird side quest that was find this synth who doesn't sleep, it's a myth, and blue 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 blue. And this is where the show starts, because the first 2 seasons of the show, and this is something I always praise the show for, it's realistic. It's realism. It seems like it could be any modern day contemporary drama about a family. It just so happens to have artificial beings in it, and that to me was always a selling point of the show. It was always a strong point. But Niska's storyline, and especially the ending, seems a lot more fantastical. It seems a lot more like a typical fantasy. It doesn't seem like a realistic modern day show that happens to have synthetic life forms. It seems like this is a fantasy quest where there's especially the whole thing about the synth who doesn't sleep. Now, again, I'm not saying it was all bad, because I did really like the I can't even remember the name, but what I'm talking about, the android that Dr. Morrow invented in season 2, which was a version of her daughter, but it was very different than a synth. It was created to be sentient and complex. And at the end of season 2, she released it to the world. I actually forgot about this, and how she inhabited the body of Odie, I think his name is, the malfunctioning synth from season 1, played by that prostitute guy on Game of Thrones. Yeah, probably confused, but you know what I'm talking about. That was interesting. I did like that reveal. I think that was a pretty cool reveal on how this artificial intelligence was different in the sense, and wiser, and sort of more tied into everything, so was able to tell Niska everything was going on. But then again, it got a bit too fantastical. Whereas Niska, it was like, this is your destiny, Niska. This is what you're meant to be. This is the quest, and I'm gonna incite you, give you all these magical powers. It reminds me of like Neo and the Matrix, or what's another example? I don't know. It just seems like something I've seen before, and it has too much of a stereotypical fantasy feel to it, which this show has never been about. So it really changed direction. So this kind of thing, I mean, I'm kind of interested to see where they go with this. But on one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't feel like the same show. And what's even worse, though, is the whole thing with Maddie and her baby, and how he has prophesied you will give birth to the Queen of Sense who will create peace. This is very, 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 very mythology, fantasy heavy, extremely so. And again, I'm not saying I don't like it, but it doesn't feel like the same show. And I don't know if it necessarily, because I'm conflicted about this, because part of me said, oh, this is kind of interesting, but the other part is like, this is kind of ruining the show. This doesn't really fit into the type of show it's done, because I wanted to see a realistic portrayal of what it was like for synthetic life forms to become alive, and how they would integrate, and all the stuff I was saying earlier in the review. That's what I wanted to see, and that's what I liked a lot about season 3. We saw the aspects of how they made commentary about minorities and other groups that are discriminated against in the different struggle to gain them rights, but then bringing in this fantastical element of a magical baby that will bring peace kind of defeats that. It kind of is antithetical to that, and kind of is like the stereotypical fantasy show, which is not what this was. And again, I'm not saying I hate it. I'm just saying I don't know. I don't think it was the best decision for the show, and it's taken off in a totally different direction. And we don't know at this stage if there will be a season 4. I don't know. It seems like the show is losing some popularity just from what I've seen, so I'm not sure if there will be a season 4. But if there is, it looks like it would be really different. It would be much more fantasy, stereotypical fantasy mythology-like than the 3 previous seasons, which I don't know, especially at the end, the way Miska had those superpowers and she just came in and controlled all the sense. It did remind me a lot of Neo and the Matrix. And I don't know if they were saying, because I liked how Maddie went to that, I don't even know what his title was, the president guy in charge of the committee, and was like forcing him to let her mother go, and she would turn herself in return. Like, that was interesting. I thought there was a lot they could do with that. But then Miska barges in and is like, "Boo! Listen to me, part to see." And I was like, yeah, I don't know where they're going. Are they saying that she's going to take over the world? Is she going to use her mind control powers of the sense to take over the world? I think that would be cheesy. I don't know. Maybe they're not going that way, and I'm just totally off base here. But it did seem to me, I got that impression that she was going to take over that, head, whatever is the guy's that leader of the committee, take over his job. I don't know. But speaking of Maddie, I didn't like her storyline either. Her whole thing. I mean, it did get kind of interesting when they had that reporter snooping around with her. I mean, it was the most obvious thing in the world that reporter was snooping and was figuring out who she was. I think Maddie was dumb for not figuring this out earlier. But I did find that a bit interesting. But her whole relationship with Leo, I didn't really buy it. It seemed out of left field, and as we see what it was building to, it seems like that was the reason why they put those two together, is so they could have this magical baby, and they wanted to have it in a character that we're familiar with. So hey, we're familiar with Maddie, she's old enough now, let's put her together with Leo. It just seemed, I don't know, seemed silly to me. It seemed very plot-driven, plot convenience. We want to have this magical baby, so let's put those two together. I don't know. Anyway, my rating for season 3 of Humans out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. Yes, I'm still giving it an 8, which is the same rating I gave to season 1, although I gave season 2 a 9. So I would say, because as I said, there are parts of the season that I think are better than the first 2 seasons. Like the whole dynamic of the commentary they made on the sense, having to gain the rights and the different reactions, the different groups, the different hate groups, how there's some of the sense wanted to blow them up, some of the humans wanted to kill the sense, but then some of the sense wanted to team up with the humans, and it's a very complex dynamic, which I think was amazing. As I said, there were some other particular character stories, such as Karen and Sam, and Karen's death, and then Joe bonding with Sam. That was amazing. Really love that. Some stuff that just really worked, and Mia's death was amazing. So I would have liked to give this season a 10. I wish that it was the best season yet. Unfortunately, it did have a lot of drawbacks, as well as the ones I was just mentioning. Bringing in all the fantasy moments of it is kind of questionable, and having characters like Angus and Antal, which weren't handled very well. Just, and the whole thing with Maddie and Leo is kind of, I don't know. So I'll ultimately give this season an 8. Extremely good. I do hope there's a season 4. I am really rooting for there to be the season 4. But we'll see. We'll find out. Anyway, that is it for my review of Human Season 3. You can check out my channel as I continue to cover many shows like Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Star Trek, Babylon 5, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.